All right. Welcome everyone. My name is Elvin Freitas. I'm the Vice President at Pangram Labs, and want to let you know that this is an amazing Pangram Labs webinar, which we are calling a Mosaic approach to academic integrity in the AI era. And we have with us Chris Ostro, who will
Hey there.
introduce himself. Hey, how you doing, Chris?
Hey there, everyone. My name is Chris Ostro. I'm an assistant teaching professor at CU Boulder, as well as being an AI and learning specialist for the course design team.
Yes, and so Chris is going to be giving us an awesome presentation. But before we get to his presentation, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. We have the chat open, so please let us know in the chat, where are you zooming in from? And we would love for you all to connect with each other. Hey, I'm from New York. I'm in New York, so that's where I am. So if we have different parts of the country, please put that in the chat. We would love to see that. Hopefully the chat is available to everyone. Oh, we have a raised hand. Okay. So I will fix that in the back end and make sure the chat is. I'll enable the chat. But in the meantime, feel free to take it away, Chris.
Hey, everyone. Just wanted to say hi. Good to meet you all. Really excited to get this going. And again, like Elvin was saying, please jump in the chat a bit. I am going to be watching that. Like anyone who is teaching the pandemic, I feel pretty comfortable, kind of Twitch chat watching while teaching. But I'm hoping this is a chance for people to make some connections and stuff as well. So let me jump into the presentation. All right. Well, hey, welcome. This is my presentation on the Mosaic approach. Actually, I'm going to move this window. There we go. So this is the presentation on the Mosaic approach. This is the way I've been approaching AI in my classroom, integrity and things like that. So let's take a look. And I kind of want to walk through the journey I went through with all of you. So, hey, that's me. Look at that action shot. But assistant teaching professor and learning and AI specialist at CU with a focus on continuing education in non-traditional student classrooms. But I also want to start there. What kind of classrooms we're all in? What kind of classroom you're in, what kind of institution, what kind of students you're interacting with really, really matters a lot in this discussion. So please, right now, if you can, in chat, go ahead and just drop in chat what kind of classrooms you're in, what kind of classes do you teach the most, things like that. But just a little bit about me, I'm going to ramble while hopefully I see the chat start going. I teach both, multiple modalities, in person. I actually teach in-person hybrid as well, which is like a dying format, as well as entirely online, async and live classes. I also teach process rather than product oriented courses, right? Like, my rhetoric courses are about how to write and teaching a process, not necessarily just how do you get the best paper. Then I'm also at a major R1 school, which matters here, right? These schools put increased pressure because of increased costs, and that puts, is a good lubricant for people to make not the best decisions sometimes. And in terms of integrity, and then finally, my class size is relatively small. I'm in classrooms of 15 to 25 students on average. And hey, chat's open now. So get there and please tell me about your classrooms right now. But anyway, and also because I'm teaching non-traditional students, some of my classes are really traditional. My freshman level class, especially, is 18 to 20-year-olds. But then my, upper level classes are anyone from like 22 to 40, which is interesting. I'm watching that chat now. I'm seeing people. I love it. Ooh, I recognize a bunch of these names too. So while we're going through this, I'm going to encourage you to really reflect on what is unique about your institution and your student contact place, and what pressures might your students have that maybe mine don't. I'm going to tell you what works for me, but I have no doubt that there are like additional layers and complexity that could change this conversation. So first, I want to throw out a few other questions for the classroom. You're all my students now. So first, what are you doing in your classes right now to safeguard your assessments? Secondly, what are you encountering in the classroom in terms of student AI use? And third, what was the first assignment when you noticed wide Gen AI usage with your students? And again, look at this. I'm seeing people in chat. You're all doing it, killing it. I love this. So while I'm reading these, I'm throwing my answers in here. When I first encountered this stuff, I was on vacation in New Orleans with my wife and her family. Like, it was a summer class. I'm sure we've all done this. We're teaching a summer intensive. It's a course we've taught a handful of times. It's all pre-built. I have built it. I've updated it. I've tweaked all the readings and all the prompts. I feel so good about this class. We go on this little week trip to New Orleans, and I have all these plans. Like, okay, I know when the grades, when these assignments are going to be turned in. So on Wednesday afternoon, they'll do something, and I'll stay back at the hotel and do some grading. Right? I have all these really high, lofty plans. And, one day that afternoon shows up, my wife and her family go out to go do some cool like New Orleans touristy stuff. I'm excited to hang back, enjoy the air conditioning because New Orleans in July was brutal. And I'm enjoying the air conditioning, starting to read. And I start noticing some rough stuff. First, it became really, this was a class on comics, I should say. It became really clear to my students were not doing the readings, right? They were making really vague references. Oh, yeah, Batman does that heroic thing on page 94. Like, what? But then also, I was seeing these references from outside the readings or references from things I've never heard of. And far be it for me to say that I have read every paper on academic comics. That is far from the case. But I've taught this class a lot, and it's really weird when I'm seeing only papers I've never heard of. Then I started noticing my students were making just basic submission mistakes. Maybe they're putting stuff in the wrong format, the wrong length, wrong number of sources, wrong types of sources. That's interesting. It just is a little red flag I start noticing. Third, by the way, this would have been in July of 2023. Saw someone in chat ask that. Then after that, I started noticing students were skipping scaffold assignments, but then turning in full pieces, right? Oh yeah, I didn't do an outline, a rough draft, or an annotated bib, but I got a full paper in on time. That's interesting, right? And then finally, I noticed that some students were just making, I might have 5 or 6 different students doing a similar topic, and they all have the same sources. So this set off a bunch of red flags. At this point, I had vaguely heard of Gen AI, but I didn't think it was all that big. I thought it was just some novelty. I thought it was, the next blockchain, Bitcoin sort of thing like that. So I just didn't take it seriously enough. But after I Googled a little bit, it started to become clear what was happening. And I did the only logical thing you can do at this moment. I absolutely panicked. Are you serious? I'm on vacation in New Orleans, and this totally destroyed any of my work order. My wife and her family came back, and I had done like 1 paper, right? Everything was on fire. Nothing is adding, nothing is going well. Oh, by the way, I wanted to drop the link to the presentation in chat. Apparently, I did not do that. So let me drop that in there if you want to follow along. But yeah, so I'm panicking. I'm having a not great time in New Orleans. This is also leading to really deep existential questions of have my students even learned anything? Am I teaching things? Right? So what I did first was just what any of us do. You react quickly and you just try to stem the bleeding, so to speak, right? What can I do to fix this problem right now? So first, I immediately banned all Gen AI use, sent out a patronizing email. Hey, students, I'm on to you. Don't do this. Then I just thought of all AI as cheating, right? I mean, that was my first encounter with it. This kind of left a bad impression, bad taste in my mouth for sure. I then also personalized their decisions. I think this is a mistake a lot of new teachers make, and I'm a little embarrassed. I made this mistake, 15 years into my teaching career. This cheating was all about me. Why did they do this to me? Why'd they ruin my vacation? Why aren't they reading the stuff I think is fun? This is a comics class. Why isn't anyone having fun? And again, if you're ever yelling, why aren't people having fun? It's a bad sign. But then this is something I did that took a lot of time, but really did help. I took every assignment I had in the class, ran through ChatGPT 15 to 20 times, and read every piece of output. And this actually really did help. This is a piece of advice I still give as kind of a first starting point for anyone trying to really modernize their classes to integrate these things, because you need to know what the output's going to look like just by default. This took a lot of time, and I probably shouldn't have done it while on a vacation, but it helped. Also, I started having, just haphazard AI detection use. I didn't know anything about the complexities of AI detection then, right? So I was just grabbing whatever detectors I could find online, including, the old OpenAI text classification tool. Oh, what a loss. But, I'm going through these things and I'm getting totally different numbers. It's all pretty random, but it's kind of helping guide my eyes. Also, lots of emailing and meeting. I met with basically every student I had questions about that semester. Really short notice. Again, really not a cool thing to do on vacation. And then ultimately, I started playing cops and robbers a lot of cops and robbers. And what I learned from this process, I was able to get relatively near certainty. I ended up over the course of that semester plus the next semester, I ended up honor coding, submitting to our honor code office about 15 students, 14 of whom ended up admitting, fully admitting to having broken the ethical lines we agreed on, right? So I felt with enough work, I was able to get pretty good certainty. That one student who didn't admit it, by the way, just submitted a paper that was full of hallucinations. So I don't know. I still feel fairly confident there as well. But it was unsustainably time consuming. To be clear, I have taught for 15 years. I have a pretty good idea, in terms of planning my grading. This cache of papers that I was grading should have taken me about 3 to 4 hours. It ended up taking 20. I can't just quintuple my workload forever. Like that's not a tenable long-term thing that will end up ultimately killing the class. Secondly, it damaged the student-teacher dynamic. My students were terrified of me, and I was not having a good time. That did not work. None of that was good. Beyond that, it also made teaching awful. This is going to sound so stupid, but I love teaching. This is one of my favorite things to do. I am lucky to get to talk and be smart for a living and help other people get to their goals. And it is so, so, so fun. And my reaction in this moment of crisis had totally made it not fun for me in a way that, I don't know, I did not think was sustainable. Beyond that, these tools have just blurred a bunch of lines. As I was meeting with these students and talking with them, there were so many students who did things that I thought were totally rational with these tools that I had just never considered in my design. Students using these tools to help them re-outline a paper they already wrote, to reverse outline it, then they would restructure it and have it help them unreverse that reverse outline. I don't think that's unethical. I just hadn't considered it. And of course, that left marks on the detection back then, and so just these little things were becoming clearly blurred. And then just like with anything else, some students are trying really hard and some are lying really poorly, right? This has been the case since the beginning of teaching, since, Pythagoras was teaching people with like sticks and sand in ancient Greece. There were students who were like BSing the work they're doing. That's always been the case to some degree. And this was made harder by the fact that it's blurred with students who are actually just trying to learn new stuff. And finally, the last thing I learned is banning just did not work. For telling my students I'm on to them did nothing. Also, why it didn't work, there's already high student buy-in, right? If all these links work, if you want to go click on these, right? But there's already high student buy-in, right? I mean, most surveys we're seeing are anywhere from like 80 to 90% of students use AI for work at least weekly. That's a ton, right? You can't ban something that like 80 to 90% of students are doing. Also, there are legitimate uses, right? Like I said, there are people who are using these things in really innovative ways, in ways that really spur on learning. The exact discussion here is fraud, right? There are tons of people and tons of academics I interact with who will fight to the death over how well certain articles are designed and whatnot. But ultimately, Bestani et al. And Keston et al. Both show very clear use cases where using AI guided by faculty is better for student learning than no AI. And that's interesting. What it makes it increasingly clear to me is that there are good ways to use these tools and they're surrounded by pitfalls. And what my students need is my guidance. And then finally, students want to understand it, right? Like, again, more surveys on this, but even just anecdotally, the number one request that semester in my class and my FCQs, my evaluations, was AI guidance. And it's so rare that students are asking for more learning, and I don't want to miss that opportunity. And I realized that by banning it, all I had done is I'd created an absence-only classroom. My students want this thing, they're all doing it, and all I had done is make them do it in secret. And that doesn't work. And when I say it doesn't work, I don't just mean this is like because I'm the cool teacher. I mean, literally, if you look into like the history of the DARE program, it made students more likely to do drugs, right? These sort of abstinence only, just say no things don't work, especially not with something with this high of buy-in. I want my students to know how to do this stuff and I want them to know how to do it safely. And that means I have to lean in. So I'd create an absence only course. That never works. So let's pivot. How do I pivot here? Critical realizations. There's already high student buy-in. So if that's the reality, I have to deal with it, right? I think this might just seem kind of cynical to a few people, but at the end of the day, there's only so much I can do to change the world. If this was like 10 to 20% of my students were using AI, maybe I could push back. Maybe I could tell them, do not use this. Let's get rid of this. Let me show you a better way. With 90% of my students, that's comparable to the number of students of mine who are using the internet. Right? Like it'd be very, very hard. I'd have to restructure everything. I could, but I'm also not sure that would really serve the learning goals and objectives I have. Beyond that, ethical use is complicated. So I need to help them draw clear lines. If I can draw clear lines about my expectations in class and I can explain and logically support them, I think that'll help. Finally, my students want to understand. Again, how rare is it that students are begging us for more knowledge on something like this? And if they want to understand, they need training. Like I need to lean in, I need to build supports here and not pull away. Also, other realization I had here was that it's super hard to be a student right now. And this might seem a little weird, but I just want to touch on this for a sec. Being a student right now is insanely difficult, right? Even since I was in college, the cost of college has doubled. About 30% additional students work at more than 15 hours a week. right? And then with AI, there's these unclear lines, there's inconsistent policy. My class, as we'll see, has a pretty open AI policy, but my students might have it right before a classroom where any use of AI is prohibited, and then right after a class where all uses of AI are good, right? Like the lack of consistency can create a ton of confusion. But then beyond that, tons of these students have skill deficits from COVID, right? That is, I think, a big part of what's underneath all of this. My students are weaker at reading. They are weaker at a lot of critical inquiry skills that ultimately they should have come to college and had like scaffolded support to build those muscles. And instead, this tool, this miracle tool came out that provides part of an answer, or at least a way to not directly deal with those deficits. And I don't love that that's the choice a lot of students are making, but I also can't blame them. If I were a 19-year-old coming to college feeling unprepared and it was insanely expensive, like my parents might have to take out a mortgage level of expensive, yeah, I would be doing everything I could at all costs to pass. And I think just being aware and having empathy for the position your students are in is really valuable here. And I would really encourage you to like talk this out with them. My experience has been that just centering this conversation in the classroom once has earned me so much buy-in from some students. But knowing all of that, help me clarify what I need to do. So goals as I pivoted. First, and I know this is like cynical again, I need to bring my time investment down, right? We're all teachers, we're all doing a job. And even if you love your job, I can't grade for 60 hours a week on top of the rest of my job. It's just not doable, right? So I had to find a way to bring that investment time-wise down. I also had to familiarize myself with these tools. It's clear to me there's a ton of new AI tools literally every day, and my students are finding them really quickly. I should at least be pretty familiar with most of the big ones. Then I had to get on the same side as my students. I will not keep just playing cops and robbers. It will kill the class, both for me and for them. And then also, I need to use the honor code as a last resort, but I need the honor code to exist, right? That might seem weird to say, but like, I need there to be a thing that I can escalate to for some types of students to take me seriously. That's not most students in my experience, but there are some students for whom, when push comes to shove, they need to know that they could get in trouble. And even though I try to use it as little as possible, having that thing is helpful. And I need to feel confident when I use it. And then beyond that, I needed to figure out AI detection. I was super uncomfortable with just like the randomness back in 2023 of a lot of that. And I need to discourage lazy use, which was kind of my first attempt at coming up with a definition of what bad AI use is, right? If the lines aren't clear, let me clarify it. If you are copy pasting 100% output, a Gen AI output as your own work, that is what I would call lazy. And I also think it makes bad answers generally. So again, trying to clarify some of those lines. So where I'm at now is this sort of mosaic approach. I've taken 6 different ways in my class, none of which is 100% accurate, and kind of pulled them together a little bit aligned. And we'll walk through that. But I think this gets us pretty close to where we're going. So first, AI literacy assignments. This is bar none one of the biggest things that I had to add. And I've added these into every course now. So first, these are insanely important. I need to teach efficiency with these tools, but also skepticism. I need my students to be deeply, deeply skeptical of AI every time it tells them anything. I think that is one of the core things they need to know. And beyond that, I think it's easy to communicate why this is valuable even to the most cynical students, right? My students who are business majors, who are just there to get a degree and don't care, I have found it's actually really successful to make this clear to them. Hey, if you just get used to taking AI and just passing off its output as your own, all you've done is automated that future career. No one's going to pay you 6 figures for this job when they could pay $20 a month. And that like kind of cynical kind of rebuff, we'll say, of that view has really gotten some of my most historically unparticipating students in the fray. But also, your students need guidance. Right now, there is such a big gap between the students who know the most and the least about this stuff. Students who might have just by pure chance went to a poorer school district are so far behind when it comes to AI right now, and we really need to be aware of that. I would love, and I use this as a place in my class to kind of level set a little bit. Third, this is hard because students lack subject knowledge expertise. And this might seem weird, but that's the place where I think most of us first got skeptical of AI, was when you ask it about a bunch of stuff you know at an expert level and noticed it started fudging some stuff. For me, the example I always give people is with eulogies. I used to teach Latin. I asked it to write me a Latin eulogy. and every individual sentence was like beautiful, profound Latin. But each sentence was a totally different century, in some cases, millennia of Latin, right? You'd have one sentence that sounded like modern papal Latin next to a sentence written in the style of Julius Caesar. No single author would ever have written that piece. And so I noticed that because I am a subject matter expert in Latin, right? I noticed that and immediately put some cracks into relief for me that then I know now to look out for. But our students aren't experts in anything yet. Ideally, the goal of college is that they're experts, at the end. So when I'm trying to teach them these skills at the beginning, this is actually a real issue. And so a few things I found that really work here, just to kind of talk about my own process, was making them do assignments based on themselves. Most of us are at least near experts on ourselves. I mean, we're always growing. I'm always learning new parts of Chris. But starting here and leveraging self-knowledge really helps for me. So I have two different assignments you can click into here. If people are curious, I'm happy to throw it up on the share screen. I say that, so I might as well just do it. But the first one here was a discussion. Here we go. So this first one here is an assignment where students are asking AI to help project what is the best job for them and to kind of help them visualize a plan towards it. And this is after students have already done multiple assignments, kind of meditating on these questions themselves. And I have gotten such great responses because students inevitably, when they get to the AI part, it gives them a few really good ideas, but a few terrible ideas. And students were really shocked by this. Like it told one of my students who is afraid of crowds that they should be a concert organizer. And the only reason was because they had mentioned concerts. They had mentioned being afraid of concerts so often in their like ChatGPT history that it just know you talk about concerts a lot. What a great moment for that student to learn some critical inquiry about AI, right? And the second one, and this one works, this is obviously smaller, but this is after a whole course where every week I give them some assignments that require AI use. At the end of that entire thing, they put this prompt into ChatGPT and they ask it to write a profile of them. And ChatGPT makes some, wild swings here. It takes individual data points and turns them into patterns. My favorite thing it's ever done is for me. If I do this assignment, there is one time in my entire history with ChatGPT that I have made a marijuana themed joke. And it was because I play a lot of fantasy football. There was a player who got in trouble for he got caught with a bunch of weed on him. I couldn't find a good pun name, so I asked ChatGPT to help me come up with a pun. That's it. To this day, every time I do this assignment with my students, it tells me you are a huge weed humor connoisseur or something along those lines. And it makes me laugh every time because it has this one data point that it has turned into this whole idea of me. And again, this might seem silly and stupid. And honestly, it's a great chance to get some laughs in with your students and build some rapport. But it also makes some of these lines clear. When my students see this sort of funhouse mirror version of themselves on ChatGPT, it really helps put into relief where the issues are, at least some of the issues. Cool. Going back to this. So AI literacy, one of the big shortcomings here, though, is that you can only teach what you know, and so many of us are still learning this stuff. And if you're not sure on this, this is the time to get sure of it. Secondly, I developed an AI disclosure form. We'll take a look at that in a second. But I had a few clear goals on this when I made it. First, I want it to be quick and unobtrusive. Second, I want this to offer the students something. I tell them full on the top, if you fill this out honestly, you will never get in trouble, right? I want this to be an invitation for us to sort of restore that social contract. I want them to trust me and for me to trust them. Tell me how you're using these tools. I will tell you how I'm using my tools, and I will give you feedback along the lines of what you're actually trying to do. But if you do this, you'll never get in trouble. Also, clarifying to students that transparency is probably the future. Like that's increasingly clear to me in industry. I have many, many friends who work in a handful, computer science, programming, things like that. Being able to tell your supervisor what tools you used where is essential. Yeah, Elvin's dropping these links in now. But if you take a look at that first one, the open to vague one, that's one where it's this one, where basically I just said, tell me how you used it. Give me a narrative paragraph at the end, whatever. This was a good start, but it didn't really work for a few reasons. Students just forgot. It was a big one. But the other thing was a lot of students didn't know what's AI, right? Most of my students would never put Grammarly here, for example. But that matters because Grammarly helps a ton. It is AI, and it will set off AI detection, right? Knowing these things matters. So when I updated it, I updated to something like this. And again, my goal here was that this should take under a minute. This should be the student fills out. This is at the end of every prompt. This is just attached. Students write their paper and then they go here, they checkbox whatever they used. They go here, they checkbox how they used it, and then they give me the relevant share links. Here's the ChatGPT link, here's the whatever. And what I love about this is by them giving me the link, again, if they're all honest, they are totally 100% off the hook. They have nothing to be scared of, but it gives me insights. So I'm giving relevant feedback to how they're actually using these tools. Oh, you prompted ChatGPT this way? That's why it gave you this output. Okay, here's a way you could do this better next time. Oh, okay, you had this output and you weren't sure how to pull it into your paper. Okay, here's some interesting ways you could transition this. Maybe we edit these parts this way, right? But at the end of the day, I am now giving them feedback along the lines of the new writing process they're developing. And the other thing about this that was hard was you need to communicate it everywhere. So I put this form at the back of every single prompt. But then here, this is the language that I use on my syllabus. This is on the next, like lower on the slide. And this is the language up in the syllabus, this long, page-long thing about AI. Then I also have a whole page on Canvas that is just my explainer of my AI policy, plus a 20-ish minute video of me talking about it. And this is what that page looks like. It's actually even longer now because for this part right here, I added a citation for each bullet point because I want my students to see that this is not arbitrary. I'm not just randomly giving them BS assignments. There is real intention and like thought going into this. So again, if you do develop anything like this, my number one piece of advice is to communicate it everywhere, right? It is impossible to take my class and not run into something about my AI policy within like 5 minutes. Cool. Going back to this though. So it wasn't perfect at first, but iteration, right? I mean, we're teachers. We're not going to get stuff perfect at first. That's not what we're great at. No one's great at that. What we're great at is learning and iterating and improving. So I iterated, I improved. You've seen the current version. My advice was to put it everywhere. But I also want to touch again about that last thing. Students can rush. If students, it's sort of an interesting thing here. One of the big imperfect issues here is if students are like being students, they're doing stuff last minute, whatever, it's really easy to forget this, right? That happens. But the other thing is if students are already committed to sort of extrajudicial ways of doing the homework, they're not going to be honest on this. My experience is most students are. I should say in my classes, I'm at about like 80 to 90% uptake on this now. Most of my students do this form. And that has made my grading way easier, but there are still going to be outliers. So that brought me to AI detection. And I know, we're in an AI detection company's talk right now, so I'm going to assume this is an interesting room with people with very strong opinions one way or the other on AI detection. Let me be clear. I don't think it's perfect, right? I mean, you can look at the Saha and Faizi article that came out a few weeks ago. Pangram and AI detection products like it are really, really good increasingly at spotting unedited output or unedited human work, but they're still really struggling with mixed use. I want to point out, though, that to some degree, that's okay to me, right? Like if my students are taking AI output and then they're wondering, this is bad, let me improve it. That is the first step towards what I think is actually ethical use of these tools to some degree. Or at least one potential use that's ethical. There's tons of other ethical uses, but still, all I needed here, I did not need perfect eyes. I do not need AI detection to be some magic bullet. I don't expect any of these things to be magic bullets. I just needed to be good enough to help me do a few things. First, I needed it to be helpful in helping me corroborate what students told me on that form. If my students told me I used AI in these ways and I used it to help with my conclusion, that should look a certain way in AI detection, right? And that's helpful. The other thing is I just use the AI detection really to help catch that lazy use I mentioned before. Sure, AI detection might really struggle to catch a student who did some complicated stuff with Claude plus ChatGPT plus Notebook LM. That's great. But it will not struggle to catch the student who just passed off 100% AI output. And that's helpful. Beyond that, I use this a lot like a metal detector, right? I'm not actually relying a ton on these individual reports for anything on their own. They just guide my eye. If I use Pangram or GPT-0 or Turnitin or any of these products, and I have 18 papers, 15 end up getting below a 5%, and the other 3 get above a 40, I just know I need to dig into those 3 papers. That's it. This is just one piece that helps me know to dig deeper here. No student has ever reported or like summarily executed or anything like that based on AI detection for my classroom. But also it focuses my vision. It saves me time. This is a big part of that whole bringing down the time investment part. And it's a good chance for me to model transparency. I have done a really good job in terms of like telling my students how I am using tools and trying to use this to normalize them telling me that back, right? I will have bullet points in the bottom of prompts that I polished with ChatGPT or things like that, and asking my students and showing them that modeling, that has went a really long way. And again, these tools are just a starting point in the conversation, nothing else. One of the and honest, like high scores can have for honest reasons. I had a student last semester who had a 92% on AI detection, and she ended up, we went through her paper. She had spent 15 to 20 hours writing this paper. The only thing was at the end, she had asked it to polish her paper, and that was it. That was the whole reason for the high score. She could prove this entire history of work, and then this polish just gave her a high score. You should never act on on AI detection alone, but it should be a starting point for conversations. And as another part of that conversation is process tracking, right? There are so many different ways to do process tracking. Right now, different apps are coming out with their own version too. This is no different than the process tracking that Grammarly is coming out with right now. But obviously the two that we're most familiar with are Google Docs and Office 365, because these are the big kind of collaborative spaces a lot of colleges use. And both of these have process tracking built in. I will say you can also disable them. And I tell my students point blank that if you disable your process tracking with me without telling me why, that is a bit of a red flag. And students will have honest reasons. I have definitely had students who they use Google Docs as a place to think through thoughts, and maybe they type stuff on a page that they'd be uncomfortable with me seeing. Okay, so I tell them from the moment you actually start writing this paper, you should have a living document where you are writing here and maybe thinking here. We come up with kind of interesting ways to navigate that. I want to respect student privacy, but ultimately, this is also going to be part of basically any professional office job they have. I myself regularly will have to send documents to my boss that has the version history enabled. I will often have conversations with my boss where we go through, oh, I saw yesterday you would word it this way and you changed it. Why? And there's a whole discussion there. So I also want to model the kind of like appropriate professional ways to use these things. I should say up top, I'm no idiot to this, right? For at least a decade, tools have existed that spoof these logs, right? If you just Google right now, Google Docs, version history, edit, you will find dozens, if not more, tools that can do this. These have existed. I mean, they really blew up during the pandemic because it was a great way to work from home and maybe fudge how much work you're doing. But also beyond that, there are totally legitimate reasons that the process tracking might look wonky, right? One that came to my mind, I had a student who was, like me, she was doing her work while traveling. And while traveling, she started a paper, got on the airplane, finished it on the airplane, got off, and then as soon as her phone or her laptop connected, it just looked like one giant edit happened in a minute. Well, yeah, that's not really what happened. It's just that she lost internet connection, right? But on the revision history, it would look wonky. But moving down, playback apps are cool as well. If you haven't played around with these, this can be part of. I didn't know where to put this reference. I wanted to put it somewhere. Process tracking is great. Playback apps are things that play off that process tracking and turn the paper's writing process into a video. I find these really nice. Finally, awkward conversations. On some level, this is the heart of teaching, right? We have all you get into teaching partially because you are excited, maybe not excited, but you're willing to have these conversations and have these moments with students where you're talking about what their goals are, what they need, the supports, what issues they're running into, all of that. This is just an extension of an old part of teaching. We should hopefully be some amount of comfortable having these hard conversations. And first, no matter what, you should talk to any student if you have questions about their papers. Before I honor code any student, I have talked to them so many times. I've given them multiple opportunities to meet with me, all that jazz. It is the single most important thing you can do, because there's tons of legitimate reasons AI detection might be off. There's tons of legitimate reasons revision history might look weird. Tons of legitimate reasons, their AI disclosure form and something else might not line up. Give them a chance to talk about it. Also, for what it's worth, in my experience, most students are not great liars, right? The vast majority of students who I had suspicions about, who when I went to talk to them, they were just like, yeah, I made a bad decision. Where do we go from here? Right? That's fine. I mean, look, this is just anecdata, but in my own experience, I've only really had one student who lied to my face, and I ended up finding later I was wrong. And at least when it comes to AI, I mean, there's been tons of other stuff in my career, obviously. But I'm just talking about these conversations. If you go into these conversations and you make the path of least resistance being honest, I think most students will be. but it's all about how you approach that conversation. First, start with empathy, start with understanding, right? If you're just leading with those things, this is part of why I talk about how difficult it is to be a student. If you lead with that understanding and that empathy, tons of students are going to be willing to work with you and meet you part way. Also, this is a great chance for you to be modeling your own engagement and instructor presence. The more you're leaning in towards the student, you're modeling what you want them to do. Finally, this is a great place where you can bring in evidence from those other things, but you can't just rely on them alone, right? You can say, hey, on the Pangram report, I noticed X, Y, and Z, and that didn't totally line up that you said on your disclosure form. What's up with that? That is usually a great starter, but you got to give them a chance to fill that in too. But again, this is another imperfect measure. Students can lie, it does happen, or they can forget, they could not think about it. Tons of stuff, there are tons of reasons this could go awry. And that's finally when my last step is just second chances. If a student, if I pull a student and we talk about their paper and they insist they didn't cheat, even if I am 100% certain they did, I'll just give them another chance on the next paper, right? Because first of all, a few things could happen. If a student was honest from the drop, if in that very first time I was suspicious of a student, they own up to it, great. We can now openly talk about helping them find the line. And hey, they've been honest. Maybe I can give them a rewrite, or we'll figure something out. If that student lied and they stuck to it, they now know they've been caught. The reasonable thing is for them to try to toe the line and adjust their process accordingly. So there's still an indirect lesson here that I can monitor for on that next submission. Third, if a student lied and continues to cross that line, they know what they're doing is in bad faith, and there's really no hesitation I should have if I catch them in the future, right? If I catch a paper in the future they wrote that they clearly didn't write, I'm going to meet with them, but at that point, the evidence is mounting in a way that they're definitely going to get reported. And finally, knowing that you've been caught generally reduces cheating. This is something that Trisha Bertram-Gallant brought up in her book, but comes up here, she cites Dench and Joyce here, right? If students know they've been caught, it's usually like an 80% drop in how likely they're to cheat again. That's huge. Like just that warning shot itself is worth so much. So this allows me to, these things together especially, allow me to act with a lot more certainty, encouraging students to explore these new tools, even if they're clumsy about it, while holding bad faith students accountable. So I've got all these things that all have like an 80 to 90% sort of success rate that I'm pulling together to sort of overlay on top of each other and create, some sense of integrity. Mosaic approach. Hey, look at that. Also, citations to ChatGPT here. Look at me modeling that good student behavior. So I'm almost done talking. I swear, you're all about to talk, I promise. But where we're at now, pros. The vast majority of my students are self-reporting. I'm getting over 80% in my upper level classes. And then, in my lower level class, it was over 50, but that went up as the semester went on. At the beginning of the class, it was closer to 20 to 30%. At the end, in the final project, it was about 70. I also have more students being corrected and fewer students getting honor coded. The number of students that I catch doing something unethical early and I correct, and then they don't do it, that happens literally every few weeks. This last week, I'm working with a student, we're doing an intensive class, actually it's that comics class again. And I had a student who he missed the group work window. He was supposed to be in a group, he just missed it. So he wanted to know if he could do the paper alone and have it count as his rewrite. I said yes. He then turned in a bunch of AI generated comics to me. And I immediately just reached out to him. He hadn't officially submitted it. He had just sent me this link. So I reached out and said, oh, no, actually, this isn't appropriate. Here are the learning objectives for this assignment. And you AIing this part will actually not help with that. So here's what I need you to do instead. And if you want to use ChatGPT, here's some places it could really help. And suddenly he just did it that way instead. That student was not intending to cheat, right? That student was just making a rational response to the less than ideal position he had put himself in. But ultimately, that transparency allowed me to catch a mistake he was about to make before it escalated into like an ethics violation. That might seem silly because to you, it might seem like that is something you never would have done. But that's okay. You're not that student. I think just part of it is that being a student has changed so much. And it's easy for us to imagine I never would have used these tools this way because we're looking back on this idyllic form of ourselves as a student. But the fact is, a lot of us figuring this stuff out clumsily might have made some mistakes. And I think leading with that empathy goes a far way. But anyway, where I'm at now, there's way less time investment. I'm still putting in more time than I did in, say, 2019, but I'm putting in less time than I did in 2023. That 3 to 4 hour pack of papers is probably closer to like 7 to 8 hours now. And also, I'm back to teaching the writing process. This transparency allows me to get into the nuts and bolts of how they are writing. I am now actually teaching again. And I'm having fun. My students are laughing. We're having a great time. We have really solved a lot of that cops and robbers part. I am no longer chasing them down. We're just all collaborating on stuff and making fun of the robot, the AI robot together. It's really healed that relationship in a way that feels good. But there are some cons. First, I still have some uncertainty, right? Again, I have 6 measures that are all mostly good, but not great. This is allowing me to get, close to feeling certain, but I'm never going to feel 100% certain. But I also wonder how much of a change that is. In 2015, did I ever really have certainty? No, I just didn't have the question, right? AI has made me now hyper conscious of everything a student submits, but that really could always have been the case. Contract cheating has existed as long as teaching has. But also, this still takes substantial time. I'm still regularly looking for ways to bring that time investment down little by little. And then beyond that, I'm not convinced how scalable this is, right? This is part of why I open up this talk talking about my own classrooms. If I was only ever teaching asynchronously, which, right now that's one of many classes I teach, or if I were teaching way higher level classes, if I was teaching, more cynical, jaded students who are here for a professional degree, maybe I'm teaching some business marketing class or something, right? Multiple studies have shown that those are more likely to cut some corners. And, also, if I were just teaching bigger classes, I'm teaching 15 to 25 students. What if I had 50? I'm not sure how scalable this would be, if I'm honest, but it works for the classes I'm teaching now. Also, one downside of this is that I have to, gun to my head, keep up with the technology at all times. I can't not, right? I have to always be looking at stuff as it comes out, because the moment that gets too far ahead of me, a lot of this stuff kind of becomes less firm. And then finally, I'm unsure why those 2 classes, my upper and my lower level class, have had slightly different experiences. My working theory right now is that it's age, right? That students with more experience are more likely to see my deal, my disclosure form, as a good deal. And I think students who are maybe younger are just trying to get stuff done quick. But we're going to see. Next semester is going to be a little bit more testing of that. So what's next? First, I need to keep continuing my development of those AI literacy assignments, especially in my first year class. I've actually had an easier time developing interesting, fun AI literacy assignments for my older students, stuff specialized in whatever our course is about. But with my first year students, it's a little weaker. And so I'm looking for some good ideas there. I've actually been trolling through a bunch of stuff on LinkedIn, thanks to a handful of names I'm seeing in here. Also, I need to do some more in-class modeling, right? It's clear to me that my students really respond well to that. I want to lean into that more. Finally, I need to differentiate the courses by level. And I also want to say, underneath all this, I said before, a lot of this is just addressing skills issues that exist with the students generally. My students have real issues with reading. They have real issues with comprehension. They have real issues with a focus and attention. And I'm hoping on some level that that's something universities and university systems can step in to help. Right? I'm hoping there will be more resources for students with those issues. And then we can at least kind of work in tandem with the administration, both with what we're doing inside the classroom, to hopefully build some supports for those students outside. That's my goal. So here are a bunch of resources. If you have the link, please feel free to just go through all these. Hey, look at that. Look at this contact info. If you just watched this talk and you're like, that Chris guy was pretty all right, please feel free to drop me a line. Here I am, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, just hit me up via email, whatever. But anyway, what about all of you? What are you all feeling now? I see the chat going crazy. I think I see a lot of people just I've seen some arguments, which is exciting. But how are people doing? Drop some questions in the chat. Let me know how I can help, or feel free to unmute. I don't know if that's enabled. If that's enabled, feel free to talk.
Yeah, Chris, thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. But hopefully I'm going to bring in Bradley Emmy, who showed up a little late. Hopefully he's available. Yes, Bradley. Okay, I just want to introduce him real quick. He's in Sweden. That's why he was a little late. So he's Bradley Emmy. He's the CTO and co-founder of Panagram Labs. Take it away, Bradley.
Brad.
Oh, thanks so much, Chris, for coming. And let's all give Chris a maybe webinar round of applause. So yeah, I think maybe we can kind of get started on some of the questions in the chat here. So yeah, maybe we'll just start with the latest one, which is Chris, how do you keep up with kind of the latest tech? Where do you get your information? How do you stay up to date?
Yeah, hey, that was entirely a great question. So first, I'm going to encourage you to join any of these sort of local free communities, right? There's a ton of probably at your university. At CU, we have, the AI community of practice. We have all these different spaces where people are just hanging out and talking about this stuff, and that's been helpful. Also, beyond that, I would encourage you, on LinkedIn, there's a ton of huge names and little groups you can join. There's also a really helpful Google group, the AI and Education Google group. I have gotten a ton of good stuff there. But I have found that just literally being subscribed to those and getting emails every week or so with like, hey, here's new research that's come out. Hey, here's the new, the cheat sheet is a really good Substack, right? Where this person picks articles and just does deep dives on articles every week related to AI, right? But these have been really helpful. Beyond that, the other thing I'd really encourage is to talk with your students. The number one way that I become aware of new tools, new strategies, new whatever that students are using is just by talking with my students. Because if I keep an open line of communication with them, many of them want to know that what they're doing isn't, across the line. Right. So like we'll talk and they'll just be like, oh my God, I found this new custom GPT bot that someone made. This is cool to use, right, Professor Ostro? They send it to me. I can kind of take a look at it, but also that keeps me up to date with what a lot of students are doing.
Cool.
Do this.
Sorry,
for Caleb, your question. I do this for for every major assignment in online and traditional classes. Yeah. So I teach both in person and online, and I do it for both. Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Brad.
Oh, cool. No, just moving on to the next question. How to mitigate issues with AI detections and issues regarding FERPA.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I can take this one.
Go ahead.
So, I would say, typically the way that companies, handle data privacy, is via the privacy policy on their website. And I would say like, if the tool that you're using is vetted by your university, the privacy policy was likely vetted by the IT office and is likely in the clear. I can answer for Pangram specifically as well. So Pangram, we have a data privacy section on our website that explicitly lays out how we store data, how we process data, and what we do with that data. So for example, we never use that data to redistribute to third parties. We never train on that data. We never use that data to improve our own AI models. We only store that data to show to the user. Some of the finer points with FERPA as well is that with AI detection, some companies actually require you to have intellectual ownership of that work before you submit it to Pangram or before you submit it to an AI detector. That is actually not strictly the case with Pangram. You do not need to necessarily own the IP to the work that you submit to Pangram in order to check it for AI, because we are not essentially like redistributing or repurposing that work or redistributing it. So I would say like, first, go to your institution. So talk to your IT office. And second of all, if you want to get really deep in the weeds, privacy policy is the place to start.
I also wanted to jump in a little in the FERPA conversation too, because there are real conversations about like, it seems like the one thing that is definitely FERPA protected is like personally identifying information. So that's part of what I do is I make sure to edit that out of anything I scan with any AI detector, right? And beyond that, like it is looking at the case law, it is not clear to me that just a rough draft in progress with all PII removed would be a FERPA violation, at least where the courts currently are on it. Maybe that changes in the future, but so generally I've found that removing that PII goes a long way, at least towards like also making my university and FERPA people happy. Let's see what other questions. So going back to RIDI, the conversation on is process tracking FERPA compliant? It's on Google, right? I mean, that's if the student is choosing to use Google Docs to write their paper, right? Like it is keeping that. If process tracking is not FERPA compliant, that is such a huge issue in everything else. Right, because like the university lots of universities use Google Docs for tons of internal work, right? Literally where I work in the course design department that I'm in, the learning design group, we use Google Sheets for organizing all of our sections, right? We'll get student names and identifying information on this whole spreadsheet that we use to then like build courses and stuff. So if Google Docs is not FERPA compliant, that would be a giant problem for other reasons. My hunch is it's probably because of the data privacy things in the contract that your university signs with Google or with Microsoft.
Right. I would say to be on the ultra safe side, it's probably best to use tools that are sanctioned by your university rather than kind of going off script and using kind of other process tracking tools that may be collecting data outside the scope of what has been agreed to in institutional licensing.
So Laura, your question on like, do I tell my students about AI detection? Yep, I actually give them the direct links too. I say like, I am using these tools. Here are the links. I encourage you to run any part of your paper through if you're not sure how to look. And I invite them that if anything looks fishy to reach out to me early. And tons of students do. I have students regularly who be like, oh, I wrote this paper. I had an 8% on Pangram. Is that going to get me in trouble? Like, no, man, you're good. But like, I want them to feel comfortable opening up that conversation, right? So all for that. The question I saw earlier about someone had said that their where was this? Someone said their administration, this is Kirsten. Someone said their admin told us that uploading any student work, even de-identified, was a violation. I mean, that is probably your administration being really, really cautious. I will say, I mean, there was it was the Owasso, there's this Supreme Court case from like the early 2000s. It's the Owasso Unified School District versus someone. But like that was a Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court came down and said that student work that is still in progress is not technically FERPA protected. This is the reason you're allowed to do peer reviews, right? Like you couldn't do a peer review because that would technically be FERPA protected content otherwise, right? So like the exact lines on this are not clean. And the exact lines on this are like, unless you're a lawyer, are not, I mean, even if you are a lawyer, are not really clear and obvious. And I think especially in the era of AI, they're not defined yet. So I think that your administrator might just be like hyper cautious. But the fact is, like having talked with a handful of lawyers, it's just not clear, but it doesn't seem like anything we're doing right. And then nothing I have said here is something that the lawyers I have talked to thought would be in FERPA violation.
Cool. It looks like we have a hand up. Ted Perlmutter. Just gonna hit the allow to talk button. How are you doing, Ted?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
Ted.
we can.
I think, first of all, I think this is great. It had sort of, well, first of all, reinforcement the lessons I learned about trying to play cops and robbers and how futile and unpleasant that was. But I mean, I still, this is a broader point, feel like we're sort of, in terms of educational issues, we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. In that, if you sort of, you know, these kind of deep research modes out there, you say, give me a 30-page paper on the differences between these groups dealing with German asylum policy, and it comes up with something which is quite good, and I'm a subject expert on this. So I really don't, you know, I'm wondering, just to ask Chris to sort of go a bit beyond what his program for the day was, how do you actually deal with the fact that you are really fundamentally putting this huge amount of knowledge out in front of students who, as you said, don't really know exactly what they've got there, but which is better than you could actually expect them to do? This is my present level of crisis.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Ted, that's a sick question. I think for me, though, part of it is about scaffolding up to that, right? Like you are right. If the major paper in the class is just like write me a 30-page paper on the history of X thing, right? Like, yeah, that's something AI is going to be really, really, really good at. And what's even worse is my students aren't going to know how to actually critically analyze, be skeptical, or add or remove stuff to make, you know, to improve that thing. So, but I would also kind of push and say, like, it depends on where you start that project, right? I would have, from the very beginning, I would have students, okay, we're doing an annotated bib. Let's have this be a really hands-on thing together we are doing in class. Okay, one of the things I would do probably early in that project is I would have deep research run and then have students do a simultaneous like research race at the same time and compare the sources that deep research found in that 20 minutes to what they found in that 20 minutes. And then have them critically analyze those different sources, right? Like there are ways you are right that these tools now exist where they can make really, really like B quality work very quickly. And what I have found is that actually making students do their own work and then compare it to AI, first of all, it gets them a little invested loyalty-wise into their own work, but also it makes them a little more clear of like, oh, wow, I did this and I had fewer sources, but mine were more academic peer reviewed, whereas this one had fewer sources, but it had these other things. And then have them read a reflection piece on that. At the end of the day, I am not trying to teach my students how to never use these things. I'm trying to teach them how to use these things better than these things on their own, you know, because I think that's where the future of a lot of jobs are, right? Like at the end of the day, knowing how to use these tools to do the lazy stuff and then use your own mastery and expertise on top to create like a really good product, that's what's going to like I think is going to be ultimately what like helps these students have a career. And that's what I've been trying to do with them. So hell yeah, like if they want to start with having ChatGPT deep research them a thing, and then you all want to use that as a starting point, maybe you have different groups deep research different things and then compare and contrast the strengths and weaknesses of these. That's where I would go. Like that would be my AI literacy direction there, I think.
You know,
We have had like observed some students like with learned helplessness though. It's just like
Sure.
they see the output of deep research and they're like, oh my God, like I could never produce something that good. Right. So how do you kind of convince students to, I guess, like, yeah, like kind of like see that and still stand up and be invested in their own learning?
Well, and again, I think that's part of it, I would argue, is that's why I start with them doing their own work in the first place, because they have now put some of their own time, blood, sweat, and tears, all that into something. And I think that builds a little bit of that loyalty. But also my experience has been that more often than not, if I do that sort of research race thing with deep research, my students find fewer sources but they do find a few better ones pretty consistently, right? Like they might only have 4 sources compared to deep research is 30, but of those 4, 3 of them are like deep dive peer reviewed things, and they feel pretty good about that. And like ultimately the answer here is, how do you synthesize those 2 things? Here's the work you did, here's the work this thing did while you were doing your work. Now let's go through and figure out how you can build a meaningful bibliography here. But yeah, I mean, Ted, on the bigger picture, I think there's a whole discussion that universities need to be having on what skills we care about teaching and how we're teaching them, right? Like I want my students to be good at researching, but I don't know if the way we've taught researching for the last 30 years is going to stay that way for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll just make one sort of brief point, and then first of all, well, 2. One, I agree with very much what you say is get students bought in, figure out ways to get them to think reflectively, and really get them to think or convince. I mean, I try to convince them that I'm trying to think about what the value added that I can do using this, and so I think you're right. I'm basically modeling for them for what they want to do, but I'm just sort of again sort of stunned at the level of what AI can do in foreign language sources on obscure subjects and get it very much right, so that it did something in like an hour or in its own little 10-minute time that it would have taken me 20 hours to do. And I read the languages and all of that. It's going to generate. I mean, at some point we have to sort of admit that I don't know what this is admission, but we have to recognize that it can draw on knowledge in ways that are much more powerful than any of us, I think, even as faculty, except in rare cases, can do. And we have to figure out, well, how do you actually recognize that as an existential thing that you have a it's like playing chess against a computer, I think, and I'm trying to get away from that. But that's what I feel like I'm doing when I'm trying to sort of advise students on what to do, and I come up with my own little suggestions, and I then do the AI search on it, and it comes up with much better on things that I thought I knew pretty well. So.
And one thing I want to throw out there, though, Ted, is like what I'm hearing here, and I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but what I would encourage is for you to realize what are the skills you, Ted, have that you can pass on to those students. Because I think one thing that's so difficult here is all of us in this room, I think, are pretty, I hope, pretty intelligent people who are trying to figure out this question and figure out these problems because we lived in a pre-AI world where we know what the end result of a lot of these things should be. And we have a lot of those skeptical skills and critical inquiry skills that are valuable. And our students don't have that right now. And one of the real worries I have is like 20 years from now, we're gonna have a professorate where people don't have these questions and these conversations on these lines, right? And so whatever ways that you, I, anyone else in this room can find to pass that skepticism on and to pass that like intentionality usage onto, that to me is like the $1 million question, right? Because all the other, you are right. Like the way it researches is better than a lot of what I could do. But like, I think the solution there is I just do it with it. I have it research while I do my own thing. I can teach students to do that pretty well. But that skepticism, how do I get them to be a little distrusting of this? Oof, that's to me one of the $1 million questions.
Mm-hmm.
So
and you have that. Keep doing that.
So sorry to jump in, Chris and Ted. Great conversation,
Okay.
but we're coming up on time. And Chris, you want to hang out for a little bit? I think you said you were okay for a
Yeah,
little
I'm
bit.
happy.
So
I love
fantastic.
talking.
Oh my God, that's great. So please, round of applause, emojis for Chris, who had an awesome presentation. And yeah, here they come. That's awesome. If you want to stick around, we'll have more questions. We're going to send this out to everyone, so you have all the resources and the playback and all for you. We put in some great links in the chat too for you to try Pangram for free if you want to learn more about us via Discord and to sign up for our newsletter, which we have great resources for you. So I'm going to give the last word over to Bradley. Go ahead, Bradley.
Yeah, and Chris, do you want to just flash up your contact info one more time? So anyone who wants to reach out has your info.
Yeah, sure. This was, there we go, on that last page of the, or I guess second to last page of that presentation. But yeah, here, drop me a line. I love, if you had questions on this that we didn't get to or anything like that, drop me a line via email, hit me up on LinkedIn. I love chatting. I will never get bored talking about this stuff. So I'm happy to help. Brad knows this too well.
Always a pleasure. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris. And for all the audience, thank you all for hanging out with us. We will send you all of the presentation, the audio, the links, everything. So feel free to use these resources at your disposal. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, connected on Blue Sky. Hell yeah. Thank you, Laura. And yeah, great question, Ted.
Yeah. If anybody wants to ask questions, want to hang around for a little bit for Chris, feel free to come on. I think we can put you on if you want to talk to him. All good.
Yeah, I'm happy to
Yeah,
chat.
we'll
This is
take
literally
take
time
some
I'm
more
not
hands.
grading, so
Don't be
thank you.
shy.
Oh, that's great. Laura, yeah.
Hey, Laura.
It's my blue sky friend.
Yeah, there you go. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Laura.
And hey, Bradley, and
Great to see you
everyone.
again, Laura.
Good to see you too. I was wondering, Chris, well, two questions. One, do you have there's a lot of things that I think I'm following too. Funny, LinkedIn, I can like probably most people here, I've used LinkedIn for a long time, but I don't really pay a lot of attention to the blogs. And Leon First keeps talking about how he's putting like all his stuff on LinkedIn. So I'm wondering if you have some kind of list or something that you would be willing to share of like all the places where you are like getting your info.
Yeah.
I'd love to see and yeah, see what else I could. Not that
I could-
not that there's a shortage of info out there that I'm getting, but you know.
Yeah, I could definitely. So I don't have anything like I don't have like one list typed, but I can definitely make a point of making one of those before Elvin sends out all the stuff to include. But I mean, I'm a big fan of Substack. There are a number of Substacks I recommend. I mean, you mentioned Leon Furs, huge Leon Furs fan. His Substack is sick.
Yeah.
I also really like the cheat sheet one. I made a reference to that earlier, but this is huge fan of that. And then on LinkedIn, I mean, there's no shortage of like the thing that's hard about LinkedIn is you get this weird mix of like experts trying to make a name for themselves, mixed with people trying to sell a product, mixed with people who are just starting their career and trying to get started. And they're all presenting hyper confidently. So I find LinkedIn to be really valuable, but there's a lot of filtering you got to do too. I also I know it's a little old person at this point, but there's the AI and higher ed Facebook group that Laura Duman runs that I mean, there's never not good conversation on there. I find
That's
myself
cool. Okay, that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, I mean it's Facebook, but I find myself regularly bickering on there with people in like productive ways, like fun bickering, the healthy kind.
Yeah.
And then there's a the Google group, the AI and higher ed Google group is similarly like, it's an email group, but it's you will come to be annoyed by some of the personalities and love some of the personalities, and you'll have favorites. But again, really, really good stuff there. A lot of people will often send out kind of early research, things like that, and get notes. It's a great place just to kind of see what people are working on and get a read. So
That's
but
awesome.
I'll definitely collect like a few things into a Word doc and shoot that to Elvin before he sends stuff out.
Thanks. And I just want also, I think I wrote this, I forget now if it was in the last Pangram webinar or where, but you were in the chat and I didn't realize that it was you from from Bonnie from Teaching in Higher Ed, but I really appreciated that not TED Talk, listen to me, that interview you had with her was so good, with just comparing all the different literature and everything. I always recommend that. So yeah, that was really great. Thank you for that.
Ooh, thank you. Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun with that. Bonnie does great work, and she is an extremely good interviewer, and she made my brashness come off as charming. So I'll take that. Well, thank you.
Thanks. I think the rest is going to be more of a rant, so I think we're good. I don't.
That's okay.
I'm just done. I'm just done grading, so I think I'm just so.
I was not kidding. I'm literally looking at a stack of papers that I have to grade after this. So
yep.
Yeah.
I'm also I guess I'm also part of. I joined this book club. You've probably heard about it with John Warner and the More Than Words: How to Think About Writing in the Age of AI. Do you know about that?
I've heard of the book, but I didn't know there was a book club about it.
Okay, well, yeah, there's a book club. It's organized by David Buck, did back in 2020. He organized. He's a community college teacher, and he organized one of the ungrading for, I forget now the name of the book, but a big book about ungrading that came out, I think, in 2020 or 2021, and it was fantastic. And now he's kind of leading this book club, and it's very like kind of AI resistant. And I figured it would be really important to understand like where they're coming from, what that position is, and there's a lot of things I also agree with. But okay, so if you check it out, I'd love to like maybe online I'll continue that conversation because there's a lot of myself like rebutting in the margins, but I think it's really important to like still have an open mind to what that is, especially as it's defining like where the whole argument is like writing is thinking, writing is feeling. If you use an AI, you're not doing either one of those, and I don't agree with that, but I'm kind of interested in the nuance behind that. So maybe something to continue online.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, happy to continue that conversation first of all, but also I don't know if you saw, I gave a talk about a month ago about, I think it was just titled "Why People Have to Care About AI," but it was largely me trying to deal with that. Like, there are so many people who are brilliant who are in this AI resistor camp that are doing good work, but I also think they're there because a lot of us are still stuck in this grief cycle, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what this is, right? Like this tool came out that totally changed our work. What we're grieving, I think we could all debate the exact nuances there, but my teaching, my job will never look like it did in 2015 ever again, right? Like the things I am required to do, what grading looks like. This whole process is a new grading process I had to develop because of a new technology. And even if that's the only change, this was still a heavy lift. But it's not going to be the only change. Stuff is going to keep changing with these tools. And I think that has led to a lot of people really deeply grieving the idea of the job they had. And I understand that. But I also think that I worry about what experience a lot of students are having when they are in a classroom with a teacher who's just like angry about this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And like, because there is stuff to be angry about, but there is also productive work with my students I have to do. Like, please don't ever mishear me as like, I'm not upset or frustrated by this. I am deeply. I am being asked to do more work and being paid not more. That sucks.
Mhm.
But ultimately, like, if I am just throwing my hands up in the air and angry, my students have no one to look to for guidance. And that's where I'm like trying to find some sense of like tranquility there. This like, you know, this very Epictetus stoicism sort of approach of AI.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
But yeah,
Thanks for
drop me a
sharing
line. Let's chat more. I really do want to hear about that book.
All right, we have Kristen, right? I think she had a question for you.
Hey,
Hi,
Kristen.
Kristen.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for an awesome presentation. This really has given me so much to think about, and also, you know, just to kind of hear what other educators are doing about this, because at least in my department, we just aren't having these conversations in any sort of meaningful, centralized way. So thank you so much. I guess so. I don't have like a fully formulated question. I'm kind of like thinking about a lot of things that your presentation has raised. So sort of forgive me if I'm like a little bit rambly. I'm kind of, I guess, just thinking out loud.
All
I'm
right.
curious about, so, you know, you teach writing, and therefore sort of like the kind of stakes around integrating or kind of grappling with AI in your pedagogy are different from, say, so in a different discipline. And while in my discipline and in my teaching, writing is kind of a priority, like, you know, it is a learning objective or an outcome that I would like for them to improve, but it is not really the focus. In thinking about how to kind of operationalize or think about how much space to devote to both my own kind of like reorganizing, restructuring assignments and the course around integrating, because like up until now, I've kind of taken a like not fully abstinence only approach, but kind of like I'm going to strongly discourage you from using this, but I'm not going to talk a lot about it, or I'm not going to like do a lot to enforce that. How to kind of think about, all right, if I do want to try and take a more, as you say, mosaic approach to AI, but how to kind of do that in a way that doesn't take a ton of extra time in learning on my own part.
Sure. I mean, the bad news is you are going to have to learn stuff. Like that is going to happen. I'm going to lead with that bad news. But I do think there are ways you can gradually do this and not have it be like, well, sorry, Kristen, you don't get to have fun this week. You're only spending 100 hours learning about AI, right? Like I think there are ways you could not do that. And I think more than anything, some of my advice up front would be to go through your class and find assignments that you think maybe aren't hitting the learning goals anymore. So for me, this was pretty easy, right? Like I was going through this summer, I'm teaching 2 5-week intensive writing classes. And as I was going through them, I had a handful of discussion posts that were on like teaching grammar. And I was like, well, you know, I care about this, but ultimately, you know, even in a world where I think my students are being totally ethical, they're not going to understand why this is a comma splice because Grammarly is going to correct it before they leave that comma there anyway, right? Or whatever, right? But it became pretty clear to me. I had, you know, this one discussion post that was just explaining how semicolons work that had my students do it. And so like, okay, I can cut that and I have the space where I can put something a little more modern here. And so that's where I started building out some of those AI literacy prompts in the first place, right? And I really would, I mean, these don't have to be super heavy lifts. The very first AI literacy assignment I have for my students is they have to go through my, you know, that long page I showed a screenshot of. They have to go through that page. They have to tell me they have any, you know, they agree or disagree, and if they have any questions. And then past that, they have to read one of the hyperlinked academic articles and just give me their own thoughts on it. Right. This was a really small thing. And I should say I give a few articles I recommend to them, all of which are really loaded. right? One of them is the Hoffman one about dialect bias. One of them is the Bastani one about learning, learning goals in AI. But like I give them a few of these things for them to read and then react to, and they react pretty strongly, is my experience so far. Because like the Hoffman article, I think is pretty terrifying. And my students don't love it because I think a lot of them think of these things as like omniscient god bots, and them realizing like, oh my God, this thing has bias terrifies them. But there are these little things that you can do to start fitting stuff into your class and making space for these conversations. Because ultimately, underneath all this, what I think most classes would just benefit from is places where students can talk about this stuff. Asking your students how they are using these tools. What are you using these tools for? Because my hunch is, even like a good faith student in your class is probably not using these tools in ways that you've prohibited, but they're probably still using it to like come up with study guides. They're probably still using it to help with their time management. Asking those questions and using those as starting points can go a long way. And then in your own time, don't kill yourself work-wise, but in your own time, I would recommend joining some of those communities and then like reading an article or two every now and then, right? Keeping up with a few good Substacks, reading like one article a week on this stuff. You will be an expert in it quicker than you think, right? But you can also talk to your students and use that to help focus you on what are the things you actually need to like shore up now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's helpful to think about. And like I'm not teaching this summer, and so I suddenly have like a little bit more bandwidth to devote to this.
Also, I don't know if you saw Laura's thing there where she has a survey she might share with you. And that, like, I really would encourage talking with your students, because that dialogue, it's a small thing, but I've just noticed students are way less likely to lie to my face when they know me. Right. And so just having these running dialogues with my students and talking to them about how they're using it, how I'm using it, what are my concerns and why, suddenly my students are being more honest. And so having some survey like that and stealing that from Laura, thank you, Laura. I think that's a good call. It's like a good starting point too.
Yeah, Laura, I really appreciate that. Yeah, I guess so. Like another question that I have is like, or like a related question that I have is like, all right, in a writing class, there's a lot of kind of like natural, I think probably a lot of natural space to like talk about these things in a more direct way. Whereas in a class like, a sociology class or something like that, there's not these kind of natural like, oh, it's kind of integrated into the broader structure of what we're teaching anyways. So let's talk about it. So like I have, for example, like, during my syllabus day for the last couple of semesters, I've done a sort of activity, sort of, I think, similar to something that you had mentioned earlier in your presentation, where like, all right, I'm going to kind of connect, if you're using AI to do all of your work, then that ultimately will kind of undermine your sort of marketability within your desired profession, because my students all want to be lawyers. And I think that that's effective. I think that that hits for some, maybe many students, but then there isn't a lot of space to kind of naturally return to that conversation throughout the semester. So like, I feel like partway through the semester, the students for whom that encouraged buy-in at the beginning, they've kind of like forgotten that,
Sure.
Or it doesn't resonate with them in the same way. And also like another problem that I have faced is that like I spend a lot of time at the very beginning of the class talking about AI and explaining the reasons why, I kind of manage or I discourage the use of AI in certain ways, and trying to connect that to kind of like real stakes that they understand. But then kind of, having my assignment scaffolded in a way where like, I've kind of just given up. Inevitably, they're going to be using AI in ways that I wouldn't necessarily want to encourage on some of the sort of earlier essays, but I now kind of think of those as like, well, those are scaffolding. They will be weighted much less in the final grade. And then I've gone to the sort of high stakes blue book in class exams. And I'm having this issue now where students, despite all of my explaining, like, listen, these essays, they're weighted the way that they are because they're meant to kind of train you in the skills that will be necessary in order for you to do well on the exams that are weighted very high. And you will not be able to use AI on. But then I think there's a chunk of students who kind of fall into complacency on the essays and then massively, like catastrophically underperform on the exams. And that's very challenging to deal with because it's like, well, I've explained it to you, but I can't the message isn't registering, and then you get a 30% on your midterm and your final exam, and there's a disturbing number of students for whom that happens, which makes me feel weird at the end of the semester. So I don't. Yeah.
I got a few thoughts. So I think first of all, I get what you're saying about that at the end, but also this is like a kind of a harsh thing to say, but I think it's something we all need to keep in mind as teachers. There are some students who are going to find their way into struggling, right? Like there's some students due to work ethic or whatever, who no amount of you building scaffolding is going to be enough for. Like I have never had a class with a 100% A rate. You know what I mean? Like that just doesn't exist. And I think that if you are insisting on perfection for yourself, you're going to drive yourself crazy. What you need to do is remove boundaries and barriers and make it so that students who are putting in the efforts can know how to do so strategically to actually like succeed and to build mastery. But like, again, no, in the history of teaching, no mechanism, no class layout, nothing has ever been found to get 100%. And I think that right now I keep seeing so many teachers putting this pressure on themselves for perfection. And I think it's actually coming from this place of anxiety that it's just going to drive you crazy. You should be trying to always improve your class. You should be trying to do what you can to build that scaffolding, that structure. But again, that reality is like there are going to be some students who you just can't. Like they are just not engaged. Like I have this, maybe this might be a different institution thing too, but at CU, I regularly will have students who are there because school was the next thing, not necessarily a thing that they're stoked to be there for or ready for, right? And with those students, I try to like build some scaffolding and support, but ultimately the other thing I want to touch on, and I think the bigger thing that is really fixable, is it sounds like you bring up AI once right at the very beginning, and then you kind of drop it. But I would encourage you to like bring it up more, right? Like this is part of the reason I have that AI disclosure form on every paper prompt, because it becomes a talking point every time I assign a paper. Right now, when I assign paper 3 in the middle of the semester, paper 3 does, just by having that disclosure form in the back, lead to a very quick, doesn't have to be long. I think it's probably like a 5-minute conversation about AI and my expectations for it. But it creates a space where students can ask questions there. Hey, oh yeah, I forgot. So last paper I tried doing this. Is that cool? You know, like suddenly there's a space where it actually makes sense to ask about AI there. But yeah, I mean, I think this is true for any sort of change we're ever going to do in the classroom. Just starting off and saying something once at the beginning of the class and then never mentioning it again, that's the sort of stuff I get mad at like my administrators at CU for doing, right? Like people are going to forget that. You send out one thing in August, that's forgotten by November. I would encourage you to have like regular annoying reminders. So like, just not to say I do it perfectly, but in my class, right? Like I have AI comes up very beginning of the semester. They have to view my AI policy. They have to do that first discussion post on it. But then after that, every single paper, which is about every 2 to 3 weeks, the AI literacy or the AI disclosure form is there with the discussion, as well as having a few discussion posts cut in throughout the semester. Like, and so granted, I am in a writing classroom, which is different than yours, but I still think some of that is stuff you could do. I think having that like some sort of reminder, even if you develop your own AI policy, having a reminder at the bottom of the prompt about AI ethics in your classroom could go a long way as a reasonable place to open that conversation and not have it feel forced. And I think that could work really well.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really going to look into this sort of AI disclosure form that may open up more organic opportunities to kind of talk about.
Well, and feel free to draw the lines in different places. This is one thing I want to be like clear. I am not saying I have the magic answer for all the ways that AI should be used in your classroom. This is what works in mine. But like if your classroom, maybe you are comfortable with some of those uses I have on there and uncomfortable with some other ones, make it that clear to students accordingly and you're good. But I think that, again, that's just a really organic place to have that conversation where students probably will engage. I also think, especially if you pair it with that survey, you could have that survey towards the beginning of the semester talking about what ways our students are already using AI. Then you could kind of bring this up on the first major assessment. If you do any peer reviews, that's a good time to too. I should have mentioned this earlier, but like peer reviews in AI are a whole nother can of worms, right? Because if we're worried about AI detection for FERPA violations, it's a huge FERPA violation. All of my students copy pasting each other's work into ChatGPT, right? Like if one is a FERPA violation, so is the other. And my students are doing that literally every peer review, right? And so maybe talking to them about the ethics around peer reviews. Well, the goal here isn't just for your, to give your colleagues ChatGPT feedback. They could get that on their own, right? I want you to use your eyes, Elvin, to give this person feedback. Sorry, Elvin, you're there. But, use your eyes to give this person feedback. They can get their ChatGPT feedback on their own, right? Like, this is a really silly point. And, if you frame it right, some students will giggle and laugh, but it also allows you to like set some lines and also open that conversation in case students have other questions.
Yeah, sorry to monopolize the time. Just one,
No, you're great.
one
You're
last
not.
question. I'm curious. So do you try to communicate to your students? And if so, how do you communicate to your students the fact that like from my perspective as a professor, your essays do not have any inherent intrinsic value.
Yep.
I don't like the product is meaningless to me. It's the only way for me to kind of assess and give credit. But for me, the process is really what I'm invested in. So like, I don't care. Like your essays are just like, I mean, I'm just like so sick of reading
Kristen,
these
that's not
terrible AI essays.
that's not your Sunday favorite reading, is just reading a bunch. Oh, by the way, even if it is authentically student written, I appreciate it as a chance to give them feedback and to like help improve their learning. But no part of me is like, yes, my day off. Let's kick back and read some student written analysis of this speech. Yeah. And I have a similar conversation with my freshman students. I don't with my upper level, partially because I think my upper level students kind of get it at this point that like the goal of this class is to teach you a writing process. And while these essays are ultimately going to be used to help to figure out the process and grade the process that you've developed, I'm not, they themselves are just practice. But with my freshman students, I think 100% you are correct. A lot of them do not know that. I think a lot of them do not understand that that is ultimately what they're doing. And 100%, I think the direction this conversation is going, I want my students to view my class as process oriented, because if they view any one assignment, the end result of that assignment is more important than how they got there, they will make ethical mistakes.
Yeah.
Right. And so the more that I have like highlighted and centered that to them, that seems to have helped.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love it.
Well, thank you so much again, Chris.
I also love you apologizing for monopolizing the time. To me, the guy monopolizing time. No, you're good. Thank you so much, Kristen. Those are awesome questions. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, awesome. All right, we got Michael Thompson and Kirsten Thompson. Are they related? I'm just curious. Go ahead, Michael.
Great. Thank you. Just first of all, thank you. This has been a really, really interesting conversation. And I'm going to piggyback on what I guess the first Kristen, because I don't teach writing. I teach history actually, where there's
what era?
All of it. I teach introductory, U.S. history, African American history. I've created and use Socratic AI chatbots in the class, and where the point I'm at right now, particularly for like asynchronous online classes, is much like Kristen. Some of it is like, how to introduce those conversations, how to sustain those conversations, but it's also like the range of students that I typically teach. Some of them have already been kind of traumatized, not only by the educational process, where like we're just saying, it's like, I don't really look forward to grading the 50 papers, but they've been taught that it's all about that product, right? And so to then get them to kind of, no, it's really about the process, takes more than a minute, right?
Oh yeah, it's hard.
So that's one thing. The second thing is, as I'm introducing, like, here is how I'm using AI, and you're going to engage with it, there needs to be a point where I'm feeling like I've actually have to teach them how to do this, right? It's not enough. I'm feeling it's not enough to just say, hey, interact with this chat bot, without actually teaching them, like, hey, this is how you could productively use it. And then I've got to figure out what does that mean in the context of my class. And you can't, open the door a little.
Yeah.
You've got to open it up completely and say, I realize in doing this, there's a possibility of lots of other things. And so that's what I'm still trying to figure out, how to kind of navigate all of those things of of a student population that some of them have jumped all in and are using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever really poorly, and those who are afraid to touch it, right? Because for fear of being, accused of cheating, and all those other things. So I'll stop talking.
No, you're great. Yeah, I think you highlight some really big concerns there. I think it's important for all of us as faculty to remember we're not superheroes. I wish I had like a cool cape and a shirt and stuff. But like ultimately, this is a thing I personally get pretty frustrated by. I'm being required to teach AI literacy in my first year writing class. My first year writing class just got shortened by 2 weeks over the past year. My first year writing class already has all this other stuff I have to fit into it. It's only a three credit course, right? Like in an ideal world, and I should just say right now, this is definitely me predicting, right? Like I can't promise anything here, but in an ideal world, I really do think that what's going to happen is eventually AI literacy courses are going to be like a university, like first year sort of thing. Like that's the discussion I can already see happening at CU with some of the higher ups. Again, not making any promises, but like I hope that like 10 years from now, when like little Billy goes to university of whatever, part of his first year stuff is a class on like crash courses in basic AI literacy and ethics, something like that. So in an ideal world, I think some of this gets solved outside of our classroom down the road, but that doesn't help today. I also totally get what you're saying. Like I should say, I used to teach high school, right? Like getting students out of that high school mindset and into the college mindset of like, yeah, the goal here is the learning objectives, not just the product, is hard. Like you could not be more correct on that. Like it's really difficult. What I have found helps me, and every classroom is different, but what helps me is starting with lower stakes things where like they can see that ultimately the final product does not matter. Right? Like what we are doing is this in-class brainstorming collaboration exercise where the in groups, they're all working on this project together. And at the end, we only did it in class together for an hour. So whatever they turn in is going to be sloppy. But we had an hour together where we kind of brainstormed and mocked up this presentation together. And I was able to show them a process for how to start that, even if by the very nature of it, the end result is kind of trash. Right? Like that is a project that I do in class to literally underscore that point. And I think that we just need more things kind of along those lines in the classroom, showing students, one of my favorite papers, maybe you even read it back in the day, was the shitty first draft paper. Have people read this? This is Anne Lamott's famous like 94 piece, where it's a paper that she wrote to her students, giving them permission to write the worst possible rough draft for her class. And Lamott, shitty. One sec, I'll drop this in the chat if people want it. But like, this piece is one that I find my students almost always like really resonate with, because it is, again, like showing them like, I just want you to try. You will get an A here if you are just putting in effort, and that's what matters. So personally, that's where some of my advice is. I think a lot of you are right, it takes a lot of work, but putting the work into getting them out of that product versus process mindset is worth it, I think. Because once you get them out of that mindset, or at least challenging that mindset, the shift to the AI discussion, I think, is a lot more organic. Past that, I mean, there are tons of in-class assignments I've done using AI in the classroom in kind of a similar way. As a class, let's spend 15 minutes using chat. We'll have one group do ChatGPT, one group do Claude, one do Notebook LM, and have each of us like, here's a goal. We're going to mock up. Your boss is considering X. You have 15 minutes to put together a proposal on why this is a good or bad idea. You each use a different AI tool. One group has no AI. Let's just see what happens. Right. And like a lot of the times, I'll be honest, I'm throwing these exercises out there myself, not knowing where it's going to go. Right. I'm putting a lot of trust in the students. And like more often than not, what I've had happen is something fun, something interesting. My students are engaged. They're being trusted. And that feeling, if you remember being 18 and the first time that your teacher like kind of trusted you, that goes a really long way. And again, for this world with like AI, I think we kind of have to. But because like, you're right, I don't have the time, the bandwidth. I'm only one person with only so many hours in a day. I can't possibly do everything. And so putting some of that trust in my students has gone a long way towards building that rapport and de-high schooling maybe some of the ways they look at some of these assignments. But you know, that's my answer. But again, I'm sure there are better answers other people have for sure.
Great. Thanks.
Hey, anytime.
All right, I think we got one last one, Chris. Kirsten Thompson.
Hey, Kirsten.
Hey, Kirsten, if you're there, you can ask your question. She's still there?
Oh,
Sorry. Okay, there I am.
Hey.
Sorry, it took me a minute to figure it out. Hi, I'm Kirsten Thompson.
Kirsten,
no
sorry.
relation. It's okay. Different than Kristen and no relation to the last speaker. So, thanks so much. This has been really interesting. I just got done co-chairing a committee at my college about AI and teaching that we kind of went through the whole year and ended up kind of creating a report for the administration with recommendations of what we thought would be, good. And then I ended up joining another one that's more focused on AI detection that our like IT people wanted to put together. So I've been really thinking about this a lot. And so I really like to hear, I like talking shop and I love hearing everybody's comments. So I think it can just be so frustrating with like for my online classes, for example, I have to do discussions, which honestly I'm a little over, and I think students are a little over, but it's the thing. You have to do a discussion and then they have to do a peer response. And so usually I just, I have those kinds of as like short essays, and I use them as a chance to teach students about proper citations and references, which a lot of them are really bad at, and they don't understand, they don't know what a citation is. They don't know how to put it in. They don't know what the reference is. And I think I have reached a breaking point this last spring for my online classes. I mean, I think, one ways that you can actually have 100% AI detection is when you have a hallucinated source, because, that does not happen any other way. And so, yes, I had all of these, ways to tell that someone, I don't tell them they can't use AI. I actually, I create videos and I have an AI page where I explain the pitfalls of it and talking about it and things that they need to watch out for. And I warn them about hallucinated sources and things like that. But still, I had so many of these where, and I had TA help, so it wasn't just me doing it, but the absolute pain it was to look and see, okay, they have a source. It's kind of a real source because it's got the authors, but no, you have to look a little bit more careful. It's the right authors, but it's the wrong title. So it really is a hallucinated, and just the amount of time and trouble to do that. I think it's a valuable thing to teach them, this is how you put in a citation. This is how you properly write the reference for it. But I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. This is, so I changed for fall. I changed all of my discussion prompts to be very kind of, what is your personal opinion about so-and-so?
Sure.
What did you used to think before you started the, reading about this topic? What do you think now? And I think I'm just going to have them graded as, is there something there? And obviously they can just put that completely into ChatGPT or wherever and get something out. But I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not, the policing of it was just absolutely untenable. And so I feel like a little bit guilty, like I'm giving up. But I guess part of me does believe that I can't make someone care. And I'm hoping that, and I don't think all students are, cheating with ChatGPT by any means. I know in my face-to-face classes, I know students, who cared a lot about doing some of these assignments, but I do feel a little bit like I'm giving up in a certain way.
I mean, look, I don't know if I would use the phrase giving up. I'd say you're modernizing your class, right? And like modernizing your class involves getting rid of some stuff and adding new stuff. I'm with you on discussion posts, right? Like I teach this summer, I'm teaching 2 5-week intensive asynchronous classes. And I have tried to be, it sucks. because they're also, sorry, they're upper level writing classes, and
Mhm.
each one students have to write 50 pages each.
Well,
So like, yeah, it's actually like a huge lift. 50 pages in 5 weeks is brutal for students. And what that means for your favorite talker, Chris, right now is that I get to read 900 pages of student work in the next month. It's brutal, right? And so and in that class, like discussion posts are so weird. And I have found more than anything, and this is something Trisha Bertram Gallen talks about a little bit in her book, although not in the same way. But like, I think that students, AI, part of why it creates a crisis is it's undermining a lot of the things that have always been artificial in our classrooms anyway, right? Like those discussion posts, like a lot of those are there as sort of a paler simulacrum of what would have happened in a traditional classroom.
right.
And
Yeah.
that's all stuff that like AI, that student engagement on that was always low, and they only were doing it because they had to, and now they don't have to, right? Like now these tools have come in and made those things actually like trivial. And what I've tried to do is find any assignment that feels that way to me and replace it, right? And I'm not going to say it's 100% success rate, because I also do agree with you. When I say most students are using AI, I want to be clear. I'm not saying most students are unethically using AI, right? I actually think my own like anecdata would be like probably under 5% of students are ever like intentionally cheating. That's just in my own classrooms, obviously. But like all students are using it, and a lot of students are clumsy and accidentally crossing lines with it. And so what I've started doing is in those discussion posts, I'm having these focus a lot more, on personal things. Hey, we just read this graphic novel because it's a comics class. What do you think? Give me something in your life that this made you think about and how it relates. And if I really put some heart into some of those questions, I'm getting really good student interactions there, way more than I ever got from the ones that were like, so how does the comma in this sentence work? What is the name of this comma? But also using these spaces for part of those AI assignments, right? So like those AI assignments I pulled up earlier, like the profile one, I have that be a discussion post because I want students not just to see their own silly, ridiculous, how much it misses thing. I want them to see everyone's. And I want it to kind of start a conversation amongst the students about that, right? When I had that AI literacy assignment about them responding to different articles, that one, that was a discussion post too. And when my students were reading the Hoffman article, it led to this is a class of 16, 17 students, something like that. It led to a 33 comment long discussion thread about just the Hoffman article, right? Like most of my students were talking about it well past what they were required to for points. They were just worried about this article. And like, if you can actually make some salient conversation, like discussion posts, you can still get student engagement there. But I'm with you that like, it becomes frustrating because there's these things that we procedurally have to do, right? But sometimes that conflicts with what actually might get student engagement. And yeah, I mean, personally, hey, I'm not at your university. I'm not here to be like, yeah, screw their policy. Like, I don't know. But I do think that like, I think there is a real space to kind of realign some of those discussion posts from how you're talking about it. And I would encourage you to like make sure they're lining up with your different learning objectives. But that all sounds like copacetic to me. Talk to your university, make sure you're not like missing some guidelines that are like legally required. But otherwise, I love that idea.
Well, that's really interesting. When I looked at both of those assignments that you put up, and I looked at the profile one, and I couldn't really see, a place to do that. But now that you mention that, as far as the discussion post, I have the typical introduce yourself discussion post to start, just to, supposedly get them used to, which of course they all know how to do anyways.
Yep.
But replacing that perhaps with what you were talking about might really work. That might be really
my
good.
advice there. Sorry to interrupt. My advice there would be to pair it with that, because you do want the thing with ChatGPT or any of these LLMs is like it works off of the material students are giving it. So what I have found is like giving them a few discussion posts where they have to use ChatGPT. Like I have like 3 or 4 throughout the term where it's like, go do this thing, write your own thing, then bounce this off ChatGPT, tell me what it said, and then write me a reflection on why these two things are different. Having them do a few of those and then at the end doing the profile hits really hard, because at that point ChatGPT has just enough data for it to make some bad guesses, right? And like I did this in this comics class, where I had students write their first discussion post where they had to tell me about who they are, why they're taking this class, and what about comics interests them. And then later I had them take that discussion post, copy paste into ChatGPT, and use it to give them comic recommendations using the deep research tool. And it was terrible. Right. It did a good-ish job. I'd say for most students, it recommended a few very obvious things. Oh, you like Batman? Have you ever considered Nightwing? Like, I love that. Side note, I love Nightwing, but like a number of them were just wild swings. And suddenly my students have that skepticism, right? It's just a good starting point for sure.
Great. Thanks so much for this. I really appreciate it. And I hope they said that we'd be like, is this all being recorded and able to be shared? Like, I'd love to be able to share it with my committee. And I actually teach a graduate seminar on teaching as well. And I'd love to be able to have a link to it for my students to look at as far as AI in teaching.
Yeah. And also feel free, like I said, you have my contact info. I'd love to continue the conversation. I'm always glad to be like talkative about this stuff.
Thanks so much.
Awesome meeting you, Kirsten.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ciao. I think we're done, Chris. This was awesome.
All right. Glad to.
Yeah, we spent a bunch of people here. Go ahead.
Well, hey, thanks for having me. I enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun. I hope it was good. I hope people learned something, and I'm excited to keep that conversation going.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Still a few left, so I'm going to close it out. Thanks again, Chris. This is fantastic.
Glad to hear it, Evan.
I know he's in Sweden.
Brad.
Okay.
Have fun in Sweden, Brad.
Yeah, I know. Right? All right.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Thanks so much, Chris.